Attention duelists!
It's most
Hi everyone, I'm Moscow. I'm talking from the underworld. I was chilling with the guys, with Dante, with Farfa, Graf, all the gang, and we saw a girl above of us, and all we thought, oh, must be Beatrice, but it was not. It was Honey. Honey, it's again with us in this podcast, and I would like to ask you your ideas, your thoughts about the Metal Raider format that ended the last week. How do you feel? What do you think about the most used cards, the most used strategies? What do you want to say about the Metal Raider format?
So, in Metal Raiders, we basically had two decks that were prevalent in the format. We had Robin Goblin Toughness Boys, and we had can't remember it's the name of the card. The other continuous trap card that basically Metal Raiders was defined by which continuous trap you were using.
Ultimate Offering.
Ultimate Offering or Robin Goblin. You're building your deck around. You either tried to turbo out using 20 toughness monsters and Robin Goblin to make your opponent lose cards in their hand, or try to get double damage triggers by using Robin Goblin and White Magical Hat to rip cards out of your opponent's hand that way, while Ultimate Offering tried to dump a massive board of monsters as fast as it could onto the field to OTK, and both decks were basically only existing because Pot of Greed was at 3. Because you had such a high amount of card advantage, you could afford to run these very, very janky strategies where you're revolving around a continuous trap card and not very good monsters a lot of the time.
Yeah, the best deck, in fact, it was running very few monsters, and they have very low attack stats. Because Pot of Greed ensure that you are drawing your power spells, and that player specific was running triple Monster Reborn, so she didn't care about monsters.
Yeah, the third copy of Monster Reborn, that was a big play. I'm actually wondering if I should get a third copy myself, because it's Monster Reborn is shaping up to be one of the most powerful cards in this format, just because it's a guaranteed way to get like in the mid game, or even just to permanently steal your opponent's Summon Skull, because because the only other way to get rid of a Summon Skull, to use a Summon Skull that your opponent has in case you can't get to yours, is to either Change of Heart it or Monster Reborn it. And with Change of Heart, it's only going to be around for a turn, and your opponent's going to immediately smack back into you with this Summon Skull that you had. While Monster Reborn is permanent, and Monster Reborn gets around Trap Hole, which was the number one way to get rid of Summoned Skulls when they come out.
Yes.
Because only like one or two people have Mirror Forces, so literally the only way to kill a Monster Reborn Summoned Skull is Fissure, which could just be countered by summoning a smaller monster to buffer a fissure damage, or using a Wrath effect, which Raigeki was also was a very powerful card in that format, which resulted in actually at the end of the Metal Raiders format, we held our first ban list, and of the cards we hit, only Pot of Greed was hit to limited, and Change of Heart and Raigeki were both hit to two copies apiece. which, yeah, Change of Heart is proving even now in this current format to be also a very powerful card, but for a very different reason. Whereas Monster Reborn is powerful because it can summon skulls that have been destroyed. Change of Heart is annoying because it creates the most saltiest interactions imaginable, where you set your Magician of Faith, and then your opponent Change of Hearts it, flipping the Magician of Faith, completely ruining that entire monster, maybe even tribute summoning. So you basically you go +3 against your opponent in those types of interactions.
+2 if we count the Change of Heart, but even in that case, +2 is a lot.
Yeah, no, because you could. It's even more salty if you have a because basically, if you have a Magician of Faith and you want to set it, you have to check your opponent's graveyard as well as your own to make sure that the risk of them getting a card from their graveyard is outweighed by the reward of getting a card out of your graveyard. It's basically it is the defining play pattern of this format at the moment. Is do you have does your opponent have Pot of Greed or Monster Reborn in their graveyard? No? Okay, then you can try to run this in. Otherwise, it's very dangerous to try to risk it, because if they have that Pot of Greed and you set a Magician of Faith face down, you are betting everything that your opponent does not have a Change of Heart at that exact moment.
Yeah, nobody is doubting in using Change of Heart in a set monster. You go for the gamble. If it is Magician of Fate, I stroke goal. I'm going uphill from this point.
It's honestly the Change of Heart is probably the best. People have brought this up that Change of Heart might be too good because it's such a universal hate card for flip monsters. But honestly, I would say that flip monsters are so good at the moment in this format that even with Change of Heart at 2 copies, flip monsters are still the most primary form of interaction in this format. You got people running Man-Eater Bug, you got people using Magician of Faith, even Mask of Darkness, and now we got Cyberjar in the current format. The power of flip monsters outweighs the power of Change of Heart, which is insane considering what Change of Heart is versus what flip monsters are. Like, Change of Heart, the card that's on the forbidden list and is never going off the forbidden list ever, versus flip monsters, an archetype of monsters that have never seen competitive success in like 5 years.
Yeah. I will also talk about 2 additions in Metal Raiders that maybe people don't take a lot of them because they don't look to win games, but they are actually Sangan and Witch of the Black Forest. That those yeah, go ahead.
With the weakening of with Pot of Greed going to 1, it inadvertently hurt Ultimate Offering decks because they no longer had the card advantage to be able to dump out bodies onto the field. They would just.
I would like to remark that you are saying, because that was an usual complaining that Ultimate Offering is too good. No, Ultimate Offering is too good because we have Pot of Greed and you can vomit, poke all your monster in your board, get Dark Holded and say, haha, no, now we are even in card advantage.
In that same logic, Sangan and Witch, I actually think, got a downgrade in power in this format because Ultimate Offering isn't as good. Because one of the most powerful plays in Metal Raiders format was summoning a Sangan or Witch, then paying life to tribute it for a Thunder Dragon or Summon Skull or Cerberus, Flaming Cerberus, even to then search another monster, likely a Jirai Gumo or a Dark Elf, if you were using a Witch, or a dark or a White Magical Hat if you were grabbing a Sangan, and then you just keep doing that. You would churn through the Sangans and Witches to in addition to the Pot of Greed. That was a secondary source of card advantage. But because the primary form of card advantage is gone with Pot of Greed, Sangan and Witch aren't good enough on their own to support the Ultimate Offering deck, which means that the Sangan and Witch are not as good in general in the format, because the biggest thing that was allowing Sangan and Witch to do their thing was Ultimate Offering, letting you tribute summon immediately and then summon the monster you searched immediately.
Well, in that sense,
because they are.
I think
Sorry,
you
what?
are in that sense. I think you are right, but I would like to remark that those cards, Sangan and Witch, speed up a lot the decks. They are still very important pieces, even in this particular format, and in the Metal Raider format, of course.
I think another important thing that shackles the Sangan and Witch is the introduction of confiscation. Confiscation specifically has become the primary way of ruining Sangan searches and Witch searches, because you can now just your opponent, you can just wait for your opponent to grab the card to their hand and then just steal it entirely from them.
Yeah, or even Sangan and Witch are not too bad targets for confiscation, because actually we don't have any card to stop Sangan and Witch search. I mean, the only one we have is Solemn Judgment. If you Solemn Judgment the summon, then the opponent won't have the search. But any other case, if you destroy by battle, if you swipe board with Darkhold or with Rajeki, the opponent is getting the search. So I mean, with confiscation, even Sangan and Witch are good targets for.
I think the primary value of Witch and Sangan, because they lost Ultimate Offering, because they're being hurt by confiscation, the primary value of Sangan and Witch is actually as basically tempo cards, because
yes,
if you normal summon a Witch of the Black Rose, a Witch of the Black Forest, you have this 1100 monster that you can just attack your opponent. Your opponent is not going to want to destroy that Witch, because you're going to get a card out of the deal. So so your opponent is de-incentivized to remove it, which means you got that 1100 attack into your opponent if they didn't have any other card. If you're attacking directly, because your opponent's not going to want to use a trap hole on that on it. And if you just have, okay, I've got a Witch and a Sangan out on the field, your opponent's not going to want to use a Raigeki on that, because you just drew your opponent 2 cards that they needed. So they basically act as clogs in the machine to out-tempo the opponent, where I can keep attacking and not worry about my monsters dying, because they'll replace themselves. It's like later on in the format when we get the gadgets, where every gadget summons and replaces itself with another gadget. That's basically what this results in, where the card advantage is not as strong, but it's a guaranteed that your opponent is going to lose in card advantage if they interact with you.
Well,
I think right now in Magic Rulers format, we're only into week 1, so things aren't as complex. by week 2 and 3 is usually when things get complex because we've gotten $12 to $18 to spend on the cards in this format, which means people can buy duplicates and copies and make a more consistent shell. But at the moment in week 1, it seems very much like the deck that is being formed is a very tempo mid-range strategy, just designed to churn out as much recovery as possible, trying to use the Sangan in which to float into bodies, using Giant Rat to float into Nimble Mamanga to float into 2 more Nimble Mamangas, and that type of. And you actually you linked an article earlier about somebody bringing up what cards impacted this format more or less, and they mentioned how Confiscation and Delinquent Duo put everyone's life total at a guaranteed 6,000 because they're likely going to be using at least 2 of those effects. But I would actually argue that with Upstart Goblin and Nimble Mamanga in the format, we actually have a starting life total of 1,000 at the or 10,000 at the moment, because because we also have everyone is now running Wabakus because they need the because they don't have the natural card advantage of Pot of Greed. They need the Wabaku basically becomes an Upstart Goblin of its own. I get to not die this turn, which means I draw an extra card. It's not that I'm going to draw immediately, but I'm going to guarantee that I have the ability to draw it next turn. So that's why people are running Wabaku, because it's another version of Upstart Goblin in this situation. In the late long run, the potential draw power is more valuable. Electric Snake, I actually touted it in our last podcast as the answer to Delinquent Duo, as like, oh, I need a Pot of Greed to be able to stop losing card advantage to Delinquent Duo, and that was on paper what Electric Snake was designed for. The problem is that people aren't running Delinquent Duo. One, because they're afraid Delinquent Duo is going to get banned, because they saw Pot of Greed get banned, and Delinquent Duo is scarier than Pot of Greed for most people. So people don't want to invest the money to buy it, but also because Confiscation is much stronger than Delinquent Duo. Delinquent Duo may grab 2 cards out of your opponent's hand, but you don't get any knowledge out of the information, and you don't have any control over what cards get hit. Confiscation, while it's a 1-for-1, it can hit a choice card your opponent searches with Sangan. It can hit a it can just look at your opponent's hand, figure out what answers they have, and remove something specific out of them. The value of Forceful Sentry and Confiscation being able to have that information is actually stronger than Delinquent Duo being a +1 in card advantage.
We have other power spells in Magic Rulers that having the opportunity to shine, but Painful Choice will be a very important card in the future. And also Snatch Steal that is not played too much this format.
I have some people. I saw some people did pull Snatch Steal and they were running it, and I actually think Snatch Steal, unless you can guarantee to hit a Summon Skull with that Snatch Steal, it's actually just a worse. It's just. Unless you can guarantee that you got the Summon Skull with the Snatch Steal, it's pretty much a worse Change of Heart. Snatch Steal needs to be in a much faster format, with monsters that are a lot more valuable to steal. Change of Heart is much more useful in a tempo, grindy format where you just need that single turn to change the makeup of how things are going to go. Especially since Change of Heart can be recouped with Magician of Faith, which means that while Snatch Steal is just going to stay on the field with that monster that you stole, which is, like I just said, is only going to be doing like 600 to 800 damage a turn, which is not really going to be that much valuable unless you contribute summon over it with your own card. And in that case, you pretty much should have just used Change of Heart in that situation.
We have also Cyberjar. Those on the card.
Cyberjar. Cyberjar is definitely a powerful card. It's a card that people have considered already at this point getting banned, just because the insane turnover that Cyberjar offers. A single Cyberjar flip can guarantee a win most of the time, because the value of the cards, your the fact that it puts all the spells into your hand means that you are if you don't have a Raigeki in your hand at the time that you used it, you are going to have a Raigeki in your hand after you flipped it, because you just dug 5 cards deep into your deck. And so the fact that you get to summon so many monsters, you're likely going to be getting some you're going to be getting some form of spells in this interaction. So you got a Raigeki, maybe a Dark Hole, or maybe a Monster Reborn. You wipe your opponent's field after you summon 2 or 3 monsters. Your opponent was probably at about half health, maybe 3/4 health at that time. You summon 1 more monster maybe, and then you just go for game. Cyberjar will end the game immediately in that situation. And the biggest problem is that outside of using Raigeki and that to get rid of it, it's not it's very difficult to kill, because it's one of the few things that if you do Change of Heart it, you're actually not sure if you want to flip it or not. Because if you do flip it, you have to think about the fact that your opponent flipped that Cyberjar, which means they were prepared to win with that Cyberjar the next turn. So if you do flip that Cyberjar, can you win against your opponent? Because if you can't, and your opponent did prepare ahead of time, you're going to give your opponent all this extra card advantage. And if you flip the Cyberjar, and then you get and if the removal you have to get rid of the opponent's field afterwards is a Dark Hole, then for the most part, you're the one losing out in card advantage in that situation, because you didn't plan ahead for Cyberjar, and now you had to wipe the field. So you're probably going to just get 1 summon out of the situation, and your opponent's going to have whatever cards they drew out of that case to recoup what they your opponent's going to have the tempo advantage if you Dark Hole. If you manage to Raigeki, then great. You managed to pull off what your opponent was going to do, which was Raigeki plus Cyberjar. But if the opponent so that's the very complex. We don't want to flip the Cyberjar in that situation.
And I think
which in that
you are seeing.
Sorry,
I think you are seeing the bright side of Cyberjar. If it is possible, say the good thing about Cyberjar when it is used offensively. But I would like to talk about that. At least in my personal experience, when you are afraid of a set monster, you go with swipe board card, Dark Hole, Raigeki. So the most of the instances that Cyberjar resolved in my games were in battle phase, and I think that card it's a flip coin in that stage. I mean, you talked about when it is used offensively, when you do the flip summon, but when it's flip in battle phase, it's totally a gamble. I think that is another issue with the card.
Yeah, defensively, Cyberjar is much worse of a card because, yeah, if you flip it and your opponent gets better monsters onto their field, they can just run because you're still in the battle phase, so they can just run over any monsters that you do set that you manage to get onto the field. And if you just draw a bunch of spells and traps to recover, and you're in the middle of the battle phase, you might have just given your opponent 3 extra monsters that they can continue their attack with to clean up that and just win you immediately. So yeah, defensively, Cyberjar is probably the worst trap foot monster in the format.
Yes, it's just a gamble, and even if you don't get the monster to continue the battle, in the main phase 2 you can swipe the board of the opponent, clean their board, and even the hand with confiscation or forceful sentry, so only you are having the advantage of Cyberjet. Uh, but when I say only you is if you pull it a good card, but it can be that is not the case.
Mm-hmm.
Very look based card. Any final thoughts on Magic Ruler that you want to add?
I want to bring up the thoughts between Giant Trunade and Heavy Storm, because that is an interesting thing, because they're both similar in the rarity department. So the question of which do you get if you can't luck your way into drawing them is a very interesting question, because Trunade is less dangerous to you if you're running back row. You're and you draw a Hey Trunade. You're it has a higher value for helping you when you have back row of your own. But the only back row that Hey Trunade is good against, for the most part, is Trap Hole and Mirror Force. Because if your opponent has a Solemn, they'll Solemn the Hey Trunade, the Giant Trunade. But so if they so the question is, if they have a Mirror Force or a Trap Hole. In that situation, Giant Trunade is primarily a tempo card first. It's just used to stop your opponent from out tempoing you with it, and being able to churn to that advantage.
Yeah, at the moment
Well, Heavy Storm. What?
Yeah. In this moment, that is what Giant Tornado is. But sorry, go ahead. Continue.
Yeah. While at the same time, Heavy Storm is a much more aggressive card. It will. It is much better at dealing with Trap Hole permanently. It's very good against all kinds of removal. The problem is, though, with Heavy Storm is you have to risk running your own cards, because Trap Hole is only going to be useful against a normal summon, which means if your opponent is setting monsters, you're not going to be able to get that immediate use out of your Trap Hole right away. So if you're waiting into turn 5 and you draw that Heavy Storm and both players have put out like 3 different back row, that you're now have to debate, do I want to throw away 3 cards that I have set for reactive purposes to be able to get rid of 3 cards to my opponent set for reactive purposes? That it's a very dangerous move to use Heavy Storm with that many cards, unless you can guarantee that you're going to be able to aggressively use those back rows as easily as you can. But at the same time, Heavy Storm can end up being like a full hand rip at times because of the advantage of confiscation and delinquent duo. People are setting their back row now more often to protect it from being hit, which then immediately makes Heavy Storm that much more valuable as a way to just get rid of all the cards you tried to protect from discard.
That's what's happening right now in this format. Well, in that case, thank you again, Honey, for this session, and I hope that you are back in the podcast soon.
All right, thank you for having me back.
See ya.
See ya.